Andrew Jackson enters the American Chronicle as a refusal that never cooled. A teen in a war, ordered by an enemy officer to polish a pair of boots. He answered with a no that earned steel across his face and set the pitch of his life. The slash did not create his temper, it certified it. Orphaned by the revolution's chaos and sickness, hardened in the Carolinas where arguments were settled by nerve before they were settled by law. He learned the world's first lesson early, that authority often arrives as a boot and dignity sometimes begins as a refusal to kneel. The boy became a rider over bad roads, the rider a lawyer with sentences like blows, the lawyer a judge who treated procedure as a kind of frontier carpentry, the judge a militia general who could make a mixed crowd stand in a straight line by force of presence alone. In him, a republic still deciding whether it wished to be governed by rules or by voltage, found a man who could impersonate both. He widened the circle for millions of white men and closed it brutally for peoples who stood where expansion wanted to go. He despised public debt as if it were a personal insult and distrusted institutions whenever they took on the smell of a class that thought itself born to supervise. He loved law when it blessed necessity and suspected it when it opposed his sense of what the hour required. He spoke of the people with a sincerity that moved cities and a selectiveness that erased entire nations. The frontier taught him the vocabulary of reputation. He read law fast, memorizing enough Latin to satisfy a clerk and relying on nerve for the rest. In the Tennessee country, paper was useful, but presence better. A man whose face promised consequences could win a case before he opened his mouth. Jackson opened his mouth anyway, bluntly and briefly, and then moved to the next thing. He speculated in land, because that is what ambition did when ambition had legs, and he bought and sold enslaved people because the economy that enriched him required it, and he chose not to quarrel with the requirement. He was a planter, with a judge's pen and a militia coat on a peg. Honor governed the ledger and occasionally burned it. The duel with Charles Dickinson, insult, measured delay, pistols at dawn, left Dickinson dead and Jackson walking away with a bullet near his heart. He carried the pain like a credential. To admirers, the duel proved a man who would not outsource self-respect. To critics, it proved a man who mistook fury for principle. Both readings would recur. War made him national. The Creek War began as a civil fracture inside the Creek Nation and became, under Jackson's hand, a campaign of logistics against distance and hunger. He kept an army together on roads that were more wish than fact, coaxed militias past the term of their comfort, and turned a victory at Horseshoe Bend into a map that punished the defeated and the allied alike. Because in his arithmetic, treaties rearrange geography more decisively than sentiments do. Then New Orleans, the improbable orchestra of regulars and militia, free black companies, Choctaw allies, rivermen and pirates under a commodore of convenience, all fitted into a plan of earthworks and angles. He read ground and doctrine the way he read men. Look for the vanity that wants to do what textbooks admire, and make that vanity bleed. The British columns met a new geometry and fell by it. The treaty had been signed in Europe. The news was late. The victory was real enough for a people that needed to feel its future arriving. He stepped out of the smoke with a name the country could pronounce without hesitation. Florida taught him how far he could go before the government would retrieve him. Seminole fighters, Spanish posts, British meddlers, enslaved runaways, all the complications of a border that existed mostly on paper, met a commander who treated the word necessity as a passport. He crossed lines, seized forts, hanged 2 British subjects he called provocateurs, and sent dispatches that sounded like verdicts reached before the trial. Washington blushed, calculated, and decided to use the embarrassment as leverage. Adams wrote a letter that converted insubordination into law. Spain surrendered the province. Jackson's habit of acting first and expecting gratitude later gained national sanction. A pattern set. He moved fast, and institutions, slow, tidy, rearranged themselves to make room for the new facts. The election of 1824 divided admiration into 4 pieces and reminded him that fame is not a majority. He let in votes, lacked a majority, and lost in the House when Henry Clay's weight decided in John Quincy Adams's favor, and Clay took the State Department. Corrupt bargain clung to the outcome like smoke. Whether the phrase was entirely fair mattered less than the energy it gave him. He spent 4 years building a coalition out of grievance: planters who disliked tariffs, farmers who disliked banks, mechanics who disliked closed shops of privilege, veterans who disliked being thanked and forgotten, new voters who disliked being told to wait their turn. He and Martin Van Buren engineered a durable instrument for mass politics, a party with newspapers for lungs, rallies for pulse, and loyalty measured in appointments. In 1828, he returned and took the chair after a campaign so personal that it broke his household. Rachel Jackson died between election and oath. He blamed his enemies and carried the fact like a stone in his pocket. He recast the office by recasting its tone. Presidents had vetoed sparingly as guardians of constitutional limits. He vetoed also for policy, for equity, for the sense that a measure served a faction and not the whole. He believed the president is elected by the entire people and therefore authorized to check a Congress too easily captured by organized interests. His enemies called it usurpation. He called it representation in a form equal to the scale of the republic. He instituted rotation in office, the spoils system, on the theory that no clerk should treat a desk as property. The practice built a patronage machine and taught parties the pleasures of payroll. He told himself it democratized government. It certainly partisanized it. He created a formal cabinet, and when etiquette and feuds made it useless, an informal one to keep information moving along unrecorded routes. The Eaton Affair, Washington society's theater of ostracism aimed at Peggy Eaton, became the stage on which he smashed a cabinet to punish what he read as hypocritical cruelty and to reward direct loyalty. John C. Calhoun's cool defiance during the scandal became part of a larger estrangement. Van Buren's tact became a ladder. Nullification sharpened his creed into menace. South Carolina declared federal tariffs null and void within its borders and rehearsed secession as a cure. Calhoun supplied the theory. The state supplied the threat. Jackson supplied a proclamation that mixed law and warning. The Union is an ordinance of the people in aggregate, not a compact of states subject to unilateral dissolution. Secession is rebellion. Resist if you must, but bayonets have a grammar of their own. He asked Congress for authority to enforce the laws and accepted Henry Clay's compromise tariff, because peace purchased by statute is cheap compared to peace purchased by corpses. The crisis passed. The presidency came out sounding more like a national instrument and less like a clerk's desk. The bank war turned suspicion into doctrine. The Second Bank of the United States managed currency, restrained some state banks, and empowered others. Nicholas Biddle ran it with the polish of a man who believed meritocracy resembles aristocracy because merit repeats certain manners. Jackson smelled monopoly and the power to starve distant farms of credit on the whim of men who did not know the sound of a plow. When Biddle and allies pushed an early recharter bill, Jackson vetoed with a message that married constitutional points to democratic rhetoric. Government's favors should not be hereditary. A national engine that can bully the countryside is not compatible with Republican equality. Then he removed federal deposits, scattering funds to selected state banks to weaken the creature he distrusted. The Senate censured him for executive overreach. His friends later expunged the censure, as if erasing ink could erase memory. Biddle contracted credit to demonstrate the bank's necessity. To Jackson, it proved the indictment. Prosperity seemed for a time to vindicate him. Later, when speculation, specie flows, and British contractions combined into panic, his enemies wrote the postscript he had tried to avoid. He destroyed an institution and did not replace its useful organs with anything sturdy. He would answer that the cure for dependence is discipline. The disciplined hungry were unconvinced. Debt, to him, was not only arithmetic, it was a moral exposure. He pressed until briefly the national ledger stood at zero, an accomplishment powered by land sales and revenue arrangements that could not withstand the weather. He tried to cool a hot market with the Specky Circular, requiring gold and silver for most public land purchases, a move meant to reconnect paper optimism to weight. The order landed in an economy already trembling under strains no single policy controlled. The Panic of 1837 arrived like a floor giving way. Van Buren inherited the whole and the blame. Jackson's friends called the crash the revenge of paper and foreign tightening. His foes called it the bill for a victory over the bank he had won too thoroughly. The country learned that smashing a flawed machine does not deliver a world without machinery. Indian removal is the part of his record that cannot be laundered into paradox. He believed coexistence in the southeastern states meant perpetual collision. He cast removal as the humane alternative to endless war. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 wrapped compulsion in the grammar of treaty and exchange, lands west of the Mississippi for ancient homelands. In practice, pressure masqueraded as consent, and the march west became an inventory of grief. The Cherokee sought law and won it. The Supreme Court recognized their sovereignty in Worcester versus Georgia. The executive behaved as if enforcement were optional. Creeks, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Seminoles, and Cherokees were driven or herded or negotiated into departure under terms that looked clean to distant readers and looked like bayonets to those along the roads. The suffering was not an accident of logistics. It was the cost built into the choice. He would claim that he had spared the Republic a century of skirmish. What he did was postpone a conflict with the states by inflicting one on nations the Constitution had recognized when convenient and ignored when necessary. He mistook agitation for explosion when the mail filled with anti-slavery pamphlets. Southern postmasters detained or destroyed the bags. He applauded the discretion, treating the Postal Service as custodian of order rather than as a neutral carrier of citizens' words. On slavery itself, he lived as his class lived, enslaving people at the Hermitage, using paternal language to soften mastery, equating quiet with safety, and assuming that a subject so dangerous must be kept shut to preserve the Union. He could be generous in private cases and brutal in public policy because he did not believe people he owned or peoples he moved belonged inside the definition of the people he believed himself to serve. Abroad, he preferred settlements that read cleanly. He pressed France until indemnities were paid for old seizures, calibrating pressure without drifting into war. He recognized Latin American republics without adopting their troubles, avoided alliances that looked like favors, and favored commerce over crusades. He thought the nation should travel light. In this, a simplicity that could be cruel at home worked well enough overseas. He multiplied enemies because he seemed to enjoy the condition. The Senate's censure turned into a halo among those who thought aristocrats had conspired to pinion the people's man. An assassin's 2 misfires turned into tavern proof that Providence liked his policies. He inspired devotion organized into clubs, newspapers, and mass rallies. He inspired a rival party built almost as much against him as for anything else. He made politics inclusive for white men on a scale previously unknown. Turnout surged. Rituals of deference broke. Elections sounded like festivals, and he made the nation less inclusive by the same instruments. His party treated loyalty as currency. His administration taught the capital the smell of victory's paperwork. He left office with his successor chosen, his fingerprints on the architecture of mass democracy, and his voice inside the office as a new normal. He retired to the Hermitage with a ledger of friends and offenses he liked to read aloud. He counted his enemies as recreation and his victories as facts that time would refuse to edit. He told himself he had saved the Union from men who preferred it polite and weak. He told himself less often that he had wounded the promise of the Union for peoples who could not vote him out. He slept under the conviction that courage exculpates. He is hard to grade because he strafes categories. He defended the Union against a fury that would have strangled it by county, and used the Union to justify policies that strangled other communities by road. He destroyed a bank that had grown too powerful and helped to unmoor the credit system it had partly domesticated. He raised the veto into a public argument, the president speaking directly to the people against a coalition, and taught descendants to confuse decisiveness with wisdom. He professionalized parties as engines of participation and patronage, and left to later generations the problem of how to keep such engines from mowing down minorities. He democratized politics for white men by lowering barriers and raised new walls for those whose very presence contradicted a frontier hunger dressed as destiny. Imagine him not only astride a horse before a ragged line near a winter river, but also seated at a desk drafting a veto that reads like an indictment. Imagine a finger stabbing a map where he decides that a line of forts or a line of treaties must move 30 leagues, and the assumption that the Republic's safety warrants the pain of those who live on that line. Imagine a cabinet room where the subject is a woman slandered and the conclusion is a broken cabinet. Imagine the Senate's censure and his private satisfaction that martyrs earn better songs than managers. Imagine a postmaster's pouch lightened by order. Imagine the long road west, with its shallow graves. Imagine the Treasury's ledger balanced for a moment, then tumbling in a season of hunger. Imagine the Union, as an abstraction with muskets behind it, standing intact after a state tried to declare the laws ghostly. Imagine the cheer that rose when he spoke, and then the silence where some communities had been. He believed that the most honest argument is the one you can enforce, and he built an executive tailored to that belief. The nation, young, large, impatient, found the shape useful and the tone intoxicating. It still does. His afterlife is every moment a president waves a veto like a banner and forces a national seminar. Every time a party treats jobs as debts to be paid in loyalty. Every time a treaty is treated as a gate to be moved by necessity. Every time the male is tempted to decide which ideas are too dangerous to carry. Every time courts issue a sentence and the executive decides to test the difference between judgment and force. Every time a crowd chants, "the people," while someone at the edge of the crowd discovers the word does not include them. He is not a lesson with one moral, but a kit of tools and warnings. The tools: a louder presidency, a mass party, a veto as argument, a country stitched by participation rather than deference. The warnings: the ease with which majorities can step on minorities when energy outpaces restraint. The seduction of necessity as an alibi. The habit of equating strength with justice. The fantasy that smashing an institution produces a world without institutions. He spared the Union a genteel breakup and made it more populous. He also made other communities smaller, poorer, and farther from where they had been. A republic that wants to avoid the worst of him has to learn what he refused to, that force is not proof, that removal is not mercy, that quiet is not safety, that courage is not absolution. He died certain he had saved a people from the polished rule of men who preferred accounts to battles. Many who walked west under orders signed in his time would have told another story if any office had been built to hear them. Both stories are American. He is the hinge on which they swing. Democrat and displacer, guardian of a union and breaker of nations, creditor of the future and author of debts paid by others, the people's tribune and the architect of silences. The river of politics ran faster after him. The banks were lower. Some fields grew rich by the flood. Some houses washed away. The country still lives beside that water. He begins, if you choose to follow him back to the first inward weather, as a boy who refuses a humiliating command and is rewarded with a scar that never quite heals. The refusal becomes his private coat of arms, and the scar his civics lesson. Do not obey men who have not earned the right to command you. Do not accept as inevitable a world arranged for the comfort of a few. Do not let other people's paperwork decide your station. He grows into a lawyer who can make a courtroom remember. It is a room where force is domesticated and given grammar. He grows into a planter who counts precisely, a gambler who trusts nerve more than luck, a judge who moves quickly because he believes delay is injustice in polite clothing, a general who knows that men will stand if you convince them you will stand first. He collects grievances and spends them like currency, collects loyalties, and repays them as if repayment were the only faith worth practicing. He is hard on betrayal and slow to separate disagreement from treachery. He is tender in small rooms and terrible in big ones. He is convinced that honor is a kind of law older than constitutions, and that a nation of citizens can understand that tongue when lesser dialects fail. When the country turns to elections as festivals rather than as ceremonies, he is the natural figure for the parade. He does not invent mass politics, but he gives it a face that looks like a challenge. He makes rallies feel like proofs that government has left its drawing rooms and entered the street. He multiplies newspapers because he knows the new energy needs organs to keep the beat. He travels, he shakes hands, he converts the dignity of distance into the dignity of presence. He accepts insults as fuel and converts the country's appetite for decisive men into an appetite for decisive sentences. He never truly grows comfortable with compromise for its own sake. He accepts it tactically when a better day can be purchased by a lesser quarrel now. He never truly believes that expertise should trump will. He prefers to turn will into institutions and then test the institutions against new will. He is not a theorist of balance. He is a practitioner of momentum. The men around him are not props. They are instruments. Van Buren, deft and patient, shows him how to turn mood into durable organization and how to make a spoil system look like Republican housekeeping. Calhoun, brilliant and coiled, teaches him by negative example how doctrine can become an exit ramp for ambition. The lesson must be learned twice, once in parlors, again in the crisis where tariffs become philosophy. Clay, his adversary, demonstrates the creative uses of compromise. Jackson mistrusts the style, but buys the product when the union's health requires it. Biddle, precise and proud, becomes the emblem of an institution Jackson believes would, if left to ripen further, be able to decide by extension and contraction who prospers and who begs. Adams, across the years, offers the counterexample of a presidency that seeks capability more than applause. Jackson supplies the applause and breaks capability into its parts to see which ones still function without the rest. He makes the presidency a stage on which the national majority speaks in a single voice. But he also makes it easier for a future majority to forget to ask who is not in the room. He converts the veto into a kind of plebiscite. He tells the country that expertise must be harnessed to choice. He tells it less explicitly that choice can be harnessed to injury if the definition of the choosing public is narrow. He believes the courts are to be respected when their judgments bind the enemies he recognizes, and to be endured or sidestepped when they protect the communities he does not recognize as political actors. He believes Congress's power is to be respected when it enacts what he asked for, and to be fought as an instrument of insiders when it refuses. He creates, thereby, a vocabulary for executive energy that later generations will attempt to speak in less thunderous tones and sometimes in louder ones. If you look for the sentence that includes him all the way through, it begins with that young refusal and ends at a grave on a property made possible by policies that strengthened men like him and diminished those who could not vote for him. Between those endpoints, you see a country that learns to vote in larger numbers, to shout more loudly, to treat the chief magistrate as a voice it can hear through the closed doors of committees, to argue about banks and roads and tariffs with an intensity that would embarrass courts, to measure strength by the speed with which a decision becomes a fact. You also see the cost written into trails, into ledgers of families bought and sold, into newspapers that carry fewer dangerous ideas because clerks decided danger and disagreement are the same, into panics born in part from victories the victors did not know how to manage. He is a patriot who believes his country is stronger for having been forced to choose. He is a partisan who believes politics becomes clean when sides are honest and outcomes decisive. He is a national father to some and a national calamity to others. Both are durable truths. He belongs finally to the class of founders, not by constitution, but by style. Washington made the office dignified enough to survive. Jefferson made it conversational enough to persuade. Jackson made it loud enough to be heard in every county. Each gift can be abused. Jackson's most easily. The use that does not become abuse is to remember what he forgot, that the people, if the word is to deserve reverence, must be larger tomorrow than today, that removal is not a kindness, that a court's order is not a suggestion, that banks are dangerous and vacuums are too, that a veto is not a philosophy, that courage is not proof of justice. Keep those addenda, and the energy he poured into the office can be used to protect the weak rather than to clear them out of the way. Forget them, and the river floods the low houses again.